Come on up. All right, all right. We're going to get started. Do we have some good breakout sessions? Some good educational breakout sessions? I feel like there's so much information coming at you, which is great. That's what we wanted. So I'm going to page Dr. Randall. Dr. Randall. She's coming on over here. Great. All right. So while we had a number of panels or a number of breakout sessions that you could go to dive deep on some issues, we wanted to highlight a few issues in particular that we thought the whole audience should learn from. We're going to have two of those right now. One is going to be the impact on youth, and the second is going to be the impact on law enforcement, and that'll be right after this panel. And then we'll go back into a series of breakouts, and then the big battle will commence at 3 o'clock with the debate between Rob Corey and I. But we are so grateful that you all are a part of this today, and I hope that you're learning some information, connecting with like-minded people, so we can begin to kind of push back on what the industry has done here in Colorado. So this is our Youth Impact Panel. I'm going to allow folks to kind of introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do just briefly, and then we'll dive into conversation. So we'll start with Mr. Isaiah Hood.
My name is Isaiah Hood. I'm a teen, so I don't really have a job. I do some consulting with home theaters. I have an internship with Dolby Laboratories, which doesn't even matter here. So, so yeah.
Great. Good. Dr. Randall?
My name is Karen Randall. I am trained as a pediatrician and emergency medicine physician, and I currently practice in Pueblo.
Hi, I'm Diane Carlson. I'm one of the founders of Smart Colorado, just an everyday citizen like all of you guys in this room that just wanted to make sure that kids would be protected as marijuana became commercialized.
My name is Justin Luke Riley. I am Isaiah's big brother, so that makes me almost cool. But yeah, so I'm here as a Coloradoan. I care a lot about this conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to sit up here with some awesome leaders, so thank you.
Great. I'm going to start a little bit with my own personal background, then we'll just dive right in. I smoked marijuana regularly for about 3 years, from the ages of 13 to 16. There's a whole write-up on this in the Westward about the guy that was leading the charge against the 420 rally. Had one time smoked a lot of marijuana. So when I was a young person, I smoked regularly, and I remember it having a profound impact on my short-term memory. The more I smoked, the worse my grades got, because I would be trying to read a book, start a paragraph, and forget the previous paragraph that I just read. I couldn't remember it. So I know firsthand what this does to a young developing brain. Why don't we start with Dr. Randall? Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing? I believe you're based out of Pueblo, right? What happens to marijuana on a developing brain? What are you seeing down there?
I think I like to think of myself as a common final pathway for bad decisions. And so really what we're seeing, and we see it on a pretty regular basis, is we're seeing kids coming in on a more frequent basis with all the side effects of marijuana and side effects of a marijuana lifestyle. And the one case I would say is, and I've told a couple people here, I happened to see a 16-year-old in a trauma room. He was smoking marijuana while riding his bike. He was over 300 pounds. He and his dad, who was with him, were laughing about the fact that his dad was providing him with the marijuana. He wasn't actually attending school. And so when I looked at this, I was thinking to myself, this dad is developing his child to be dependent on a benevolent government. He's not giving him or encouraging him to get any skills or any education. So what is he training his son to do? And so what I've seen a lot of in kids is this, there's this normalization of a product. So they're using it because, well, my mom and dad are using it. I saw a 14-year-old girl just this last week. Her parents were divorced. Her mother is trying to keep her together. The girl's had several psychotic breaks. When she goes to her dad, he's an illegal marijuana dealer, so they've been doing deals in his house, and so she comes and she's exposed to the marijuana. She's exposed to guns and violence because he's a dealer. And when she goes to see him, he takes her off all the medications and gives her marijuana. So she's living a very split lifestyle, and it hasn't worked out well for her. And so I'm seeing a lot of that.
How about can you talk a little bit about the kind of medical impact that marijuana has on a developing brain?
So we know that as an adolescent goes through, we all go through this process. When we're an adolescent, it's called pruning. And so when we're learning things, we touch a hot stove, we go, oh, I better not touch this hot stove because it's going to hurt. And so in your brain, you're kind of pruning that pathway, saying, I really need to know that this is going to hurt me. So we know that marijuana will affect the judgment center. And if I'm smoking a lot of marijuana, my judgment center isn't really reacting right, and I'm not pruning those pathways. So as these kids go forward, they don't have the judgment to say, you know, driving the car at 110 miles an hour over the cliff is probably not a good thing. So they lose that kind of judgment pathway. And unfortunately, on a long-term basis, these don't return. Those pathways are gone, and they don't return. So we're seeing that. And we know that the brain continues to develop, and we're pruning until we're about 25 for women, and really men are pruning up until the age of about 28. So anytime you use beforehand is your pruning, you're developing your brain. And so that's why you very rarely see a person who becomes an addict when they're 40. You very rarely see someone who picks up smoking and starts and becomes a chain smoker when they're 50. But you do see it when you're 18, and you do see it when you're a teenager, because these pruning mechanisms aren't there if they're covered with a drug, whatever drug it happens to be.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a lot of scientific evidence that's demonstrated that heavy marijuana use lowers IQ, right?
So there's quite a bit of evidence that marijuana will lower IQ. If a mother is smoking and if she's pregnant and she's smoking, that child can lose up to 8 IQ points. If that child in turn goes on to smoke marijuana, they can lose up to an additional 5 to 8 IQ points, depending on the studies you look at. And if you add that up, it's 13 IQ points, and it's a whole standard deviation. So if your mom smoked while she was pregnant with you, and then in turn you smoke when you're a teenager, you can lose a whole standard deviation of intelligence.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I saw in 60 Minutes, there was a NICU doctor down there talking about how he's got a NICU full of babies testing for THC. Channel 4, I believe, reported that half the babies being tested in Pueblo right now are testing positive for THC in the bodies. Is this an occurrence that's happening down in Pueblo?
Oh, it's definitely happening, yeah. We're seeing more and more. There's a lot of advertising that says, oh, marijuana is good for nausea. And so there's advertising in the community, and we'll talk to people who are pregnant and say, please don't. We know that there's long-term consequences. And they will say, it's helping with my nausea. And so as a result, the babies are testing positive. And the other thing that we're seeing, and I've done a longitudinal study where I'm looking at drug screens that are done from everybody in the emergency department, and they're done for 3 reasons. They're done because you came in and you had a trauma, you have a psychiatric illness, or you're altered somehow mentally, you're coming in and you're psychotic. So those are the 3 reasons we do drug screens. And I followed drug screens from 2013 until yesterday, and what I can see is that not only is there a trend in all people for when the drug screens are positive for the month with marijuana, they're also positive with opiates, and then right behind them is methamphetamine. So the scale goes like this. If I have a high month with those drugs, all 3 are kind of high, and then when I have a month where marijuana is not high, they're all down. And that pans out through all 4 years, and it also pans out, I have a section for people who are all ages, and then I have a section for people who are 20 and under, and I see the same trend.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. One of the things I like to point out, I know one of the arguments by our libertarian friends is that marijuana is a personal choice, but what choice is it to the babies born with THC in their bodies to have that? Justin, you work a lot with recovery and people in recovery. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing here in Colorado?
Sure, absolutely. I think it's a great question, and one that we see because of the mass narrative of the further commercialization of marijuana just being something that's simply okay, and it's too late, and it's the communities that we're living in now. I think one specific time that we see with that is that it is, which I actually think is personally extremely disrespectful, because I have so many friends that actually have passed away from the opioid epidemic and other alcohol-related deaths and injuries, but that they would have the audacity to talk about marijuana being a really awesome, realistic, healthy solution to combat the opioid epidemic. I think is just, you know, in some ways it's laughable, but it's not, because it's actually, you know, you think that, you know, maybe they're gonna say I was just kidding, you know, that couldn't certainly be an actual thing that we're going to communicate out there. But it's something that is certainly misinforming, I think, a lot of communities, and particularly young people emerging or trying to emerge in long-term recovery, when the new narrative is now, well, it's okay. You know, you can, you know, there are even some treatment centers around the country that are predicated on the fact that you can just smoke weed forever and be really awesome and successful. And that's something that we see is yet again another huge argument and barrier. And just like we've seen young people talk about, well, my parents have consumed alcohol, why can't I? I mean, that used to be kind of the big argument. Well, now we have the alcohol argument, and then now we also have the marijuana argument, because my parents are doing this in my home, and why can't I do that? And so for us, it's yet another barrier for people to enter and maintain long-term recovery. And again, just because of the meta misinformation narrative around the commercialization of marijuana being something that's really good, it's you know, ongoing battle that we talk about honestly every day. I mean, I can fly around anywhere in the country, and as soon as people hear I'm from Colorado, that's all they want to talk about, you know, so.
Wow. Isaiah, you're the, normally I'm the youngest one at a lot of these events. You're now the youngest one. What are you seeing in your own generation? What are you seeing at school, among your peers in the community?
Like I said before, we had powder puff thing last night for high school for homecoming, and some kids decided, hey, let's be cool and get our jewels out and go in the bathroom and just smoke it up. And the principal came in, and all 7 of those kids
Sorry,
are now.
what's a jewel? I don't even know what a jewel out is.
So a jewel basically, what it looks like a USB drive. It's a way of. I don't know if anyone's familiar with a vape pen, or it's basically a vape pen but more hidden, and you put cartridges in these things, and it heats it up to a certain thing, and then you have this vapor, and then you breathe in that vapor, and it can you can have many things in there: nicotine, THC. I mean, the unsafe part about it is that the people who are providing you with those pods can put other things in there, because all they want to do is they care about the money. They don't care about, like, oh, this gets you high, it works, right? And so, like, and what I'm seeing today is, like, all my friends are, you know, they're doing it because it's cool. You know, I'm a person who comes like, this is an investment. I'm going to invest in this. How does this help me gain positive things, not negative things? And they're just, like, throwing their lives away with, you know, just trying to be cool to the next person. And, like, honestly, like, 3 years from now, they're not even going to know that person, which is sad. So, yeah, that's my largest concern, is that people, the creators of these pods, and it's not even pods, you have, like, RDAs, you have dabbing, and my friend just like, hey man, like, you want to try this wax? Like, literally the craziest thing is you have like a lip balm and you place it on your lips and it makes you high. That is crazy to me. Wow. And it's unsafe. And there was a situation one time where we were just at lunch table, and my friend's like, hey, do you want this brownie? And I'm like, yeah, sure, because, you know, I love brownies. That's like my favorite dessert. So I'm just like being naive, and like I'm not like stupid. I didn't even question it. I was like, yeah, let me have some. So I like ate it, and it was a spiked brownie, which basically means there was THC in that, which means I got high and I wasn't wanting to get high. And so, like, imagine if there was the creator of that put some other drug in there also, just to like make you high, and that reacted bad to my body. So it's just unsafe. So, yeah.
So one of the arguments that has been put forth by the industry, not by the industry, but by proponents of the industry, is that if we legalize it, it's not underground. If it's not underground, it's not cool. Kids aren't going to want to do it. But it sounds like, from your experience, Isaiah, they're not only smoking, but they're moving into whole different levels of high-level THC engagement.
Yeah.
Is that right? I mean, is that the sense that this isn't smoking weed out back with 8% THC contents? They're using these, what were they called?
Jewels.
They're using jewels, or dabbing, which has a much higher potency. And Doctor, do we know what that high potency? I mean, Kevin talked a little bit about the fact that all the studies on marijuana so far are maybe at 10, 12% THC. Most of the academic studies haven't even gotten into the 98% THC
Medical
yet.
science has no idea what's going to happen. We don't know. These are just, our information is just coming out. Everything that we do know was based on 1 to 3 milligrams of THC. And if you look at what's being sold now, a dab can be 80 milligrams of THC in a small round ball of, looks like wax. I'd like to tell this story because it really kind of puts it into perspective. In the mid-1990s in Australia, they did a study with pilots, and they said, we're going to put you all through a simulator, and we'll see how you do. They all went through the simulator. They landed the plane fine. And then they all said, we're going to let you all smoke a joint. And so in the mid-1990s, the most that they would have smoked was 3 milligrams. The next day, they said, and we're going to wait 24 hours. The next day, they asked me, you okay to fly? And they all said, yeah, I'm totally cool. I'm great with this. And they put those pilots, the same pilots, through the same stimulator, and most of them could not land the plane. Most of them landed off the runway. One landed sideways. They all thought they were doing a good job, and the few that managed to land the plane, they call it like adding tasks when they do sequential tasking. So they gave it a little bit of wind or a little bit of rain, and no one was able to land the plane. And so then you go, well, now, that was 1 to maybe 3 milligrams of THC, and now you're talking about guys smoking a dab of 80 milligrams of THC and getting behind a car. So imagine them getting behind a car and then at a snowstorm or a rainstorm, and then we ask, really, are we surprised that there's that kind of auto accidents that are happening?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Diane, your organization, SMART here in Colorado, works a lot with families. And families that are going through addiction issues. You work a lot on the public policy side. Tell the folks a little bit about your work, what you're seeing with regards to marijuana use among youth.
Yes, well, first of all, we formed, and our sole goal was just to make sure there was minimum protections that kids would be protected. And all I can say is through being involved in this in 5 years, it's probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, the most difficult things anyone that's engaged with us, and there's been hundreds and hundreds, and I just want to applaud every one of you for being here today, and for Jeff for having leadership to do this, because this issue has been so politicized. So it was passed in Colorado. It's been a daunting responsibility for everybody involved. There's really been no safeguards placed around what we're calling marijuana and the innovations that have occurred in the marketplace. And so unfortunately, our kids are on the front lines. They are dealing with this every day. And there's a big disconnect between what the adults think is marijuana today and what these kids are dealing with. And just like Isaiah was saying, I mean, it breaks my heart. You talk to these kids and they're like, no one will even talk about it. There's no one giving them information about it. They're not even knowing how to protect themselves. And families are shocked. When their kids get into this, they're like, I had no idea that marijuana could do this. And this is so different from the marijuana that, you know, that I thought we were legalizing. And so you have this huge disconnect. And then you have all the states around us in the national news, and it's being highly politicized. And the people that are paying the price are our kids. Adults can go in, they can try to figure this out, they can figure out, you know, who's being honest and who's not. But there are over 3,000 commercial licenses in our state. Over 50% have stayed medical, which means that a lot of those places, 18-year-olds, can gain access. And we don't have one fully legalized system, but the message to them is that all of it is safe and regulated. And so what we found, Jeff, is just people are absolutely shocked. And while the state and everyone's trying to catch up with Karen with the research and the education, we are so far behind. And the innovation of all these products are so far ahead. And you've also got a marijuana industry that is just on fire. And they're fighting amongst themselves. You've got some people that want to be really responsible, some that don't, but there's really no leadership. And Colorado is paying the price. And sad to say, we're small compared to these other states, but we have to provide leadership because they all think we've regulated it and it's safe here. And that's been the messages in a lot of these states. And they when we speak, they're just like, what are you even talking about? The reason we passed it is because all you guys were saying it was so great in Colorado. So sad to say, we have a really important responsibility. And I'm sorry I went on so long, but I just really applaud the people in this room, you guys, because there are so few people that have wanted to stick their neck out on this issue. And even if everyone in this room did something, it would be a game changer.
Diane, you've done a lot of work with SMART as far as trying to place guardrails on an industry that's just, it was wide open. Can we talk a little bit about those guardrails? And then I was at a meeting not too long ago, and I want you to, if you can, help me understand this. But right now in Colorado, there is no definition for a child endangered by drugs, right? Is that, from what I understand, within, for reasons for someone to want to remove a child from a house that has dangerous drugs being used within it, and that the marijuana industry has pushed back against that. Can you talk a little bit about your battles with the marijuana industry, about your attempt to try to place guardrails? And then thirdly, just last week, after 3.5 years, the industry said, we're not going to produce marijuana that looks like children's candy. It took them 3.5 years to come up with this idea that we shouldn't do this. So can you talk about your work, Trish, just trying to prevent marijuana from being presented to kids?
Well, it's been very difficult, and I will say that all the protections that we've been involved, we've pulled in people, experts from education, healthcare, leaders, kids, parents, every step of the way, which took tremendous courage, because when you go and you testify, I mean, you can be bullied, and included in that is media has not been fully educated on some of these products, and so the people that stuck their neck out, I mean, it took a lot of courage. But with a lot of those protections, they would never have been able to be put in place unless there were individuals from the marijuana industry. It would not have been able to pass. There are over, in 2013, there were 50 lobbyists representing commercial marijuana interests. And I think like last year, there were 30. So the money, the power behind this, and what's difficult is a lot of these lobbyists aren't involved in the industry. So when it's come to putting limits on the products or addressing potency right now, there are no potency limits. So the one thing that we have put in place, which was huge, was to make sure that THC potency is on the label. And to start, the marking that says THC to get everyone thinking about THC, because part of the confusion for our kids and for the public is that people are all thinking like everything's the same. And the oils for the kids with seizures, I mean, that's basically legal now in all states. That's basically hemp. And when you read the newspaper and you hear, oh my gosh, it's a huge economic boom, the hemp industry, this is marijuana that has 0.3% or less THC. And then a lot of the oils with the kids don't have THC in it. But there's misperceptions with our children that think the concentrates out there are the same as those oils. So part of our whole emphasis has been education at point of sale, on the labels, more information for the public, because we feel like if the people going in and buying it don't know what they're getting, then they certainly don't know how to protect their kids.
So I'm going to now turn to Justin. Justin, since the legalization of marijuana, we flooded communities with drugs, and we've seen that kind of trickle down. It's a bad version of trickle-down economics, but it's trickled down to youth. Right. One of the things that we've seen out of that is a higher arrest rate among African-American and Hispanic youth than there was prior to the legalization of marijuana. And I've been asked on cable news, well, how are people getting arrested if we legalize marijuana? Well, it's for youth. It's for people under the age of 21. You work in a lot of these communities. What are you seeing among arrest rates happening? The placement of marijuana shops, Dr. Sabet talked about that in communities of color here in Denver. They're following the exact same line that tobacco stores and alcohol stores have followed. They're targeting these communities specifically to get them hooked. Can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that?
Well, I think one of the fallacy arguments that have been posed to our communities was, again, we went through the whole medical thing, which you articulated very well, but particularly with decriminalization, that legalization means decriminalization, right?
Right.
And that, if you are not for the commercialization of marijuana, that means that you are for tons of people going to prison for smoking a joint, which is just like not even a fair argument to even get into, right? I mean, it's so one-sided, and again, it's a fallacy argument. And so what we have seen, the results are, and I actually am doing a panel after this, and I'm hopping off in a minute, so I apologize, but that panel, or that breakout session actually talked about this issue, even more so, which is the impact on minority communities and particularly youth. As Dr. Sabet did speak about earlier, very simply, there are more dispensaries per capita in low-income communities than anywhere else. That is not an opinion, that is not a political statement, that is not, you can't make that up. Get Google Maps, go to Weed Maps. I mean, it's very simple to see that it's that the low-income communities are being targeted where there are more and more dispensaries. Certainly isn't in Cherry Creek, certainly isn't in Lowry, certainly isn't, next to Crestmore Park or anything like that. And so I think when we start looking at the impact on those minority communities, the way in which those neighborhoods are being targeted disproportionately around compared to other neighborhoods, and you look at the concentration of dispensaries, follows the same pattern. And again, it really does blow my mind that we're now showing up even today having, you have to debate somebody on the fact that this is a horrendous idea. That, we already saw big alcohol, we've seen big tobacco, and the exact things that are happening with the commercialization of marijuana is like the pre-story to that, and we're now having to debate people that this is not a good idea when we have other huge examples, or even the current opioid epidemic, to say, team, legalizing and commercializing a substance in this country so far, pick a big legal drug, doesn't go well for the majority of people that use them. So those are some of my passion points. Come hang out with me during one of the breakouts. Thanks for letting me be on.
Right.
Good job, little brother.
We only got a few minutes left before our next panel, so I want to walk through solutions. Maybe we'll start with Diane and work this way. What do we do to help keep this dangerous drug away from kids and youth? Can you solve all of our problems right now, Diane?
Killing to address that issue, and three themes that we've been saying all along. Limit commercialization and availability, because normalization increases youth use. Second thing, we need to limit the products and the THC potency that are available. And we need to have a hard, long conversation about that. Our governor took off marijuana that had very dangerous and toxic pesticides, had a recall. We could have a recall of some of the most dangerous marijuana products could be taken off the shelf. And then thirdly, and what we've come to the conclusion, educate, engage, educate, and inform. People have got to start paying attention. We've got to get engaged in this issue. We need to start talking to our local and our state leaders. We need to give them the cover to hold the marijuana industry accountable, because that's really not happening. And they need to know that people are watching and that people care, because all they ever hear is from the other side. And just to get back to Justin's point, we participated with community members in neighborhoods in Denver that are completely oversaturated with commercialization of marijuana. The smell, everything, the impacts on their neighborhood. They showed up for 6 months at the Denver City Council, and you know what? Their voices aren't heard. So it's going to take powerful people to help those people. Some of these people are holding down 3 jobs. They were like, enough is enough. And they left those meetings and said to us, we're going to have to go to the industry to help us, because we can't even get our local government. Meanwhile, you look at the majority of Colorado's local municipalities, they have opted out of commercialization, and people have been incredible. They've been leaders. They're trying to protect their kids. They're trying to limit the commercialization, and that never gets talked about, right? We have people doing amazing things, and we need to applaud them and support them. And I'm sorry I took so long, but every city and county in Colorado can determine how they want to navigate this. Time, place, and manner. They can opt out of the commercialization, or they could strictly limit it. So we still have so many ways that we can improve what's going on, but it's going to take citizen engagement for it to happen.
And I would just add a couple of things. Just because your county opted out doesn't mean your kids aren't using it. I was in Lamar last night, and I had the opportunity to talk to high school students. And the coach came up to me afterwards, and Lamar they don't have commercialization there, and he said, here's what's happening. Our kids are going with their parents to Pueblo. They're buying marijuana at the retail stores. They're coming back to Lamar, and those kids are selling it in the high school, and they're making a lot of money. I was blown away. I was something I wouldn't have considered. So when you look at the overall scheme of things, treatment is really expensive. When we talk about healthcare dollars and expense to the country, treatment is really expensive, and it doesn't work for a lot of people. And a lot of people go through treatment multiple times till they reach an end point. And so the best thing that we can do is prevent. So the way we can prevent is we need to be out talking to the kids. We need to go, the Healthy Kids in 2015 for Pueblo County showed that 15% of our kids who were less than 13 had already tried marijuana. So our education needs to be, and we need to have structured education where we tell these kids, here's the problems, and here's what can happen when you take it. And it needs to start probably in 5th and 6th grade.
Isaiah, what do we need to do to help win this battle?
I think everyone in the room needs to understand that the issues with THC or marijuana are not primordial. And what I mean by that is, like, my friends are like, hey, this is a bad thing. I'm like, great, it's a bad thing, like, but where did it start, you know? And they're trying to argue, well, let's just end marijuana. Let's, like, not have it be there. And that creates problems too, because I'm not gonna say that marijuana is feckless. It's not, some people need it for medical use. Let's just go with medical use. They need it, and so, like, I think limiting, even though, like, people get, like, these green cards and they're 18-year-old, right? You can go get marijuana. There's a 14-year-old girl in my school who, like, brings edibles, candy. That's not stopping. If someone really wants to do something, they're going to do it. That's how humans are. That's how we work, all right? Like, if you're passionate enough to do something, you're gonna do it. I think it comes with, in my opinion, it's not like officers not arresting people. It's like saying, here's your limit. This is your, and I know there's already limits on, like, buying marijuana, and obviously changing what the edibles look like is a great thing. That's a great thing. But I think most people need to understand is that it's here. Like, this is here. This is a problem we're facing right now. And this isn't like a Bob Marley movement. This is not the same marijuana, guys. Like, not at all. Not at all. This isn't Peace for America, yo, you know? This is, you know, kids are dying. People are dying because of this. And I don't know. I've been affected by this because my mother, I'm adopted. Justin is my brother-in-law because I am adopted. And my biological mother, she was very abusive because of marijuana. And it came to the point that we knew it was unhealthy for her, that she had a massive amount, like a bag of marijuana. And it came to the point where I'm like, this is not healthy. And I decided to take that and bury it. And I got the worst beating of my life for that. It's not even, it's like people are, like, attached to something that's not helping them. They're just doing it because they want to. It's dumb. I think there needs to be a purpose. If there's no purpose, what drives you, you know? So, yeah.
Well, I think in my final comments here, I think that what we've seen out of the movement to reduce tobacco use is a good pathway for a lot of us to follow on this marijuana issue. Education was absolutely critical. I mean, look what they were able to do to the tobacco industry in the course of, you know, about 20 years. They were able to completely turn that around. A lot of it came from highlighting the effects of smoking tobacco. Now, the problem I think we're going to have is that we're going to lose an entire generation to this before those impacts start to come out, and then we can demonstrate that. But there's a lot that we can continue to do to fight on this. I mean, look at the way youth analyze or understand tobacco, approach tobacco versus the way youth approach marijuana. It's night and day. You want to be a social pariah at a high school party, light a cigarette. You want to be the most popular guy there, light a marijuana or start to dab. I mean, there's a pathway there, but we've just got to get marijuana onto that same pathway. And we can reduce this socially, which is ultimately what a lot of us that are conservatives believe needs to be done, is we need to win the social battle, not necessarily have to fight for government regulation on everything. So any final comments from you all as we wrap here? Great. Can we give our audience a round of applause, or our panelists a round of applause? Thank you. Okay, at this point, we're going to turn it over to the men and women in uniform and do a panel on law enforcement. Do we have Frank Mcnulty in the room? Well, we'll let them come on up. I think Frank's out in the hallway. We'll grab him. He's going to moderate this panel, so stick around. Thanks.
Like we're doing a basketball game, or? Oh, what do you want us? Now, in the third chair, from Pueblo County. I'll sit here. I got guns on. I'm never getting in. Well, that's true. Why don't we take one of these chairs off, because?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, we got that, and we ended up with the tip, and now we're doing guys down the shoulder. Yeah, I was dealing with a lot of them.
Okay, folks, as we have our law enforcement panel assembling here, get your attention back to the front of the room. Jeff will finally have his chance to have lunch. Hi, my name is Frank Mcnulty. I had the pleasure of serving in the state legislature, 2 years as Speaker of the House. Currently have a consulting company where we represent Colorado Christian University and the Centennial Institute down at the state capitol. One of the issues on which we engage for CCU and CI is marijuana. We are one of the few voices down there advocating for increased sideboards on the industry, and I give a great deal of credit to the leadership of both of those institutions for having the courage to speak an alternate view down at the state legislature, and certainly something that we think is important, that I think is personally important. We'll go ahead and get started with our law enforcement panel. I will turn it over to Deputy Martin to get us started. Tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your experiences in this area.
I'm Deputy Jay Martin with Douglas County Sheriff's Office. I actually teach what's called our Youth Education and Safety in Schools program. We've been teaching it since 2009 when we got rid of DARE. DARE wasn't meeting the needs of Douglas County at that time, so we went beyond the scope of substance use to touch base on digital citizenship as well as relationships, and we also have curriculum on distracted driving. We cover it not just in elementary school. DARE was covering, we cover it from 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. We have literally 21 lessons in total. We have taken it nationally as of this last few months. I've trained Lakewood, Arvada, Arapahoe, Jefferson, and several other people from the Front Range, as well as we've got about 150 people that have adopted it online. Our online course is our national nonprofit, which is called Digital Futures Initiative. You can go to dfinow.org and you can look that up, and there's curriculum on there. It is available for any teachers or law enforcement personnel, in particular SROs, school resource officers. I spoke in Washington, D.C. here a couple months ago to kick it off nationally, and that's kind of where most of our people that have acquired the program over the last month have been as school resource officers across the United States. It's a very proactive. I had an earlier session. It went real well for the people that attended. I think I have a lot of good knowledge background with dealing with kids. I've done that for my entire life. My degree is in teaching. I worked in the juvenile world for about 10 years prior to getting involved in law enforcement with the Sheriff's Office.
Thank you. Darcy?
Good afternoon. My name is Darcy Copal, and I'm a Deputy District Attorney in the 18th Judicial District. I work for George Brockler. I head up the narcotics unit in prosecution in the 18th. I used to be a narcotics and gang prosecutor in Boston and moved here about 2 years ago and never thought I would be prosecuting marijuana cases in Colorado, and here I am. I specialize in wiretap investigations. Last year, our office, along with many of the law enforcement up here as well, did one of the largest marijuana indictments last spring. I appreciate what George has done in the 18th, specifically because we didn't have a narcotics unit before. I now have investigators solely that are tasked to working on not only heroin, meth cases, but also marijuana. I have seen the struggle that law enforcement has had in terms of lack of funding and resources in trying to prosecute and put together these what end up being vast conspiracy cases for marijuana being grown here and distributed not only throughout the streets of Colorado, but also out of state. Specifically, and I'll talk about this a little later on, you have to imagine being able to grow here and having patient caregiver cards and medical marijuana cards, how much money these people can make on the black market. I do not deal in the gray market. It is just the black market. And I'll talk a little bit later on about sort of, you know, what you can make moving this product out of state. But I'm passionate about the work I do, about taking it off the streets of Colorado, and I'm lucky to have the backing of people in uniform who are next to me today.
Thank you. Chief?
My name is John Jackson. I'm currently the Chief of Police in Greenwood Village, Colorado. At the time of legalization, I was the president of the Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police. So I've been at this since the start. I was the lone law enforcement representative Governor Hickenlooper assigned to the implementation task force. It was a lonely experience for me that I'll describe as 150 hours of my life I'll never get back. It was interesting.
But at least you remember it, Chief.
It was interesting because of the dynamics of all the pieces that had to fall into place. We woke up one morning and we went from something that was illegal to a constitutional right. And we immediately went to 0 to 100 miles an hour. There were many times where many of us begged to slow this down to the point where we could try and do something irresponsible. And as we now talk to other states, we tell them about the rush to failure. We tell them about not right or wrong, good or bad. But what I hope to impart for you today is the voice of realism for what you're seeing on the streets in our communities. The dollar signs are spectacular. Still do a lot of presentations on this for other countries, for other states. And what I see is people become so intoxicated with the revenues that they lose sight of all of the social costs, all of the procedural costs, and we've yet to factor those costs to any point. So we continue to be good stewards of creating community safety, trying to protect and safeguard this from minors. Your law enforcement is trying very, very hard. But this is confusing, it's conflicted, and it is very, very difficult for us to determine much of what you expect us to do and what is expected of us from the legislature out in the field. It is to say it's challenging or a paradigm shift. I hear that all the time. No, folks, you flipped our world upside down. And to say the fact that Colorado traffic fatalities in the last 2 years are up 24% ought to be enough to tell you right there, we need to slow the roll and figure this out outside of the many complexities of these complicated investigations. I hope to be the voice of realism today. I just want to speak what we're seeing. What you're going to hear in Pueblo is a whole different example, but Kirk and I are linked pretty close on this. We see it the same in many ways. And we've been working on this in partnership from the counties to the cities. And I just hope that you'll listen to some of the examples that you hear today and understand that we're not making this up.
Thanks, Chief. Sheriff?
My name is Kirk Taylor. I'm the elected sheriff in Pueblo County, Colorado. We're the second largest marijuana producing county in the state. We have a lot of difficult challenges that we've overcome and a lot of difficult challenges that are yet to come. So I'm more curious to hear what you have to say. We've been fighting this aggressively since it started. I was really interested in the comments I got from some fellow law enforcement officers from another state, which were kind of interesting to me that I'd like to flesh out a little bit more as well. We really got left holding the bag as far as law enforcement. And there was not, either they did realize it and they didn't care, they being the legislature, or they didn't realize it at all. And I don't think that you as citizens understand what the pressures your law enforcement community are under, and not just with the normal lack of resources. There is a whole policy discussion that's going along throughout law enforcement currently, both from the district attorneys, the chiefs of police, and the sheriffs. So we've been real active and engaged in legislation. I'm the legislative chairman for all the sheriffs in the state. And so through that role, I deal with a lot of these policy issues that come out of the State House. So the biggest thing is to get it all together and get people talking. Probably the most interesting thing that I see is the 72% of the communities that have opted out of having it in their communities. I just find that incredible. And I think it's to the detriment of the folks that would like to see it get out of here, because quite frankly, you don't see it on a daily basis. Those of us in communities that are leaders have embraced it, see it on a daily basis. In Pueblo County alone, it's a population of 165,000. We have 170 either dispensaries or grows within the confines of that county. 170. In Lakewood, you have 0. Right, so that should give you some paradigm. So what I'm seeing from a sheriff's perspective, who's been involved with this since the beginning, is right now the governmental structure of the city and county of Denver is able to promulgate codes and regulations to, in essence, push out all the undesirables, and guess where they're going? They're going to the rest of the state. They're not going to those communities who opted out. They're going to those communities who are involved in the production and manufacturing of marijuana. So you ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to get out of Pueblo, and it's going to go to these rural communities who don't have the resources that I have, and I'm relatively small. It's going to go to these communities. Set your dial up for Trinidad, Colorado, those of you that live up north, and watch that community over the next couple of years. And then watch the next community they go to. And they are literally destroying our community. 2 other things I'll share with you that I think we're not studying. We're not studying the energy grid enough in the state of Colorado, of what it's doing to our energy grid. And we're not studying the environmental damage that it's doing to our waterways and to our sewer systems. Because these folks that are growing this stuff, either legally or illegally, are dumping it right into our sewers. And so our water quality, our environmental impact is not being gauged and studied enough, in my opinion. And our electrical grid drainage is not being, just a quick anecdotal thing. My son-in-law is a fireman, and cops in the room don't. So my son-in-law's a fireman. My daughter wanted to get back at me for something, I don't know. But the lights have been flickering in Pueblo West Fire Department, and he told me they talked to the power company, and they said, yeah, it's a drain on our grid. Really? Now, I don't know if that's going to pan out or not, but that's the amount of energy that it takes to grow this product. I don't even care if it was marijuana. Say it was a widget, and it took that much energy. We should be concerned as a community. So just the energy grid. So that kind of throws us off the demon lettuce talk. But those are the ancillary issues or the unintended consequences that no one thought of, or if they thought of, that's even worse, and they didn't care. So that's my spiel.
Thank you, Sheriff. So the proponents of recreational marijuana made a number of promises in passing it. We can't possibly make it through all of those today, but I want to start with a little session of myth busting and touch on a few of those. The first of which that I would hope that you discuss is the promise that the black market will go away if pot is legalized. Counselor, you want to get us started on that?
Thank you. So like I said, never thought I would be doing marijuana cases here, but that is not what has happened at all. I can't go into case specifics, but if you think about it, approximately if you go every 500 miles east, the price of a pound of marijuana goes up $500. So if a pound here in Colorado is costing about $1,000, you're making $4,000 once it hits New York City. Think about that profit that you're making. And you can grow it here under the guise that you're either doing it for your friends, or that you have red cards, or that it's medical marijuana, and that's how they get away with it. We've had cases with greenhouses. They try every which way to, say it's a tomato farm, or say it's something else, but it's actually going out the back door. What's been extremely concerning in some of the cases that we've actually done together is people who have legal marijuana licenses, and yet there are still pounds and pounds and pounds of marijuana that is being distributed out of state. Because frankly, that profit margin is just too good for people. Another thing that's been very difficult, and I'll hand it over to my colleagues at this point, is to prosecute these cases. When you walk into a grow that has 800 plants in it and a gazillion red cards up there, and that's my friend's friend, or that's my friend's brother, or that's so-and-so, the enforcement of that is extremely difficult because you have to go do more investigation to track down that person who frankly never exists. But when they're given 99 plants by a doctor that they can have, it is extremely hard for us on resources to get to a point where we can then indict or form complaints on these people. what I've seen as a prosecutor is that this is not going away. I have continued to do what are wiretap investigations and large-scale COCA cases, criminal conspiracies here in Colorado. And until that regulation happens, the black market will continue, in my opinion.
As long as the money's involved, the black market will continue. The people that tell you the black market is no longer in existence either simply don't know or they want to lie to you. The incentivization of all of this is spectacular. I'm that guy, and cops are good at a lot of things, but we're not good at mathematics and counting plants. Okay, we're not doing that. We're not going to walk in and count 75, 76, 77. And then you throw in Ernie's two cousins who can grow for them. It becomes so complicated, we're walking away. So I've been in a place where we've tried to count plants, and is that a plant or is that a cut or what's, and it stops. The extended plant count, which is the biggest part of this, in my opinion, that's broken in the caregiver model, has created so much confusion and so much ill intent that it does cause good people with ill motives to do bad things, and the money is there. I have been the guy that's followed up to the doctors, and I've come to Lakewood and met with a doctor that gave an extended plant count just to ask why. And he gave him the ability to grow 75 plants because he has GERD. I didn't even know what that was, and I read the thing on the internet, and it basically is you can get it smoking marijuana. The whole thing is just, it's crazy when you go talk to these doctors. And jokingly aside, I asked the guy, I said, what kind of doctor are you? He was a gynecologist, okay? This is the stuff that really just isn't thought through. And with the case she's speaking about, that was a Craigslist purchase that started when we were told that wouldn't happen, and the black market's going to go away. You can't sell it online. Well, you can, and the ad I answered basically said, it's surplus from my medical marijuana grow I'm getting rid of. There's just not enough law enforcement to chase this. I'm going to bet if I had you vote, you wouldn't want us to chase this. We were told it would lower your workload and you won't have to chase this. So if the expectation is from the community that you don't want us, this will just simply continue to get out of control. The black market is alive. The black market is thriving. It's bringing the cartels here, the cartels from Asia, Cuba, wherever. We've flipped the marijuana market. We've actually started exporting marijuana to Mexico. Imagine that. Isn't that cool? Okay, it's flipped. You've brought it to middle America, and it just goes out from here. That's what's happened. So it does not get rid of the black market. It will not get rid of the cartels. All you've done is seat them here to do business legally.
Sheriff, I know that this is something you guys have dealt with pretty specifically. Will you share some case examples for us?
Last Tuesday, we went in on a clandestine marijuana grow that was 3 miles from our city. Couldn't see it except for the air, and you could only see it from one house, who actually called my sergeant, and we confirmed it. So we went in there, and it was, this is a really interesting case. We went in with our SWAT team. We arrested 9 Mexican nationals, one who was wanted by ICE for multiple deportations and narcotics and drug trade. So the cartel's like right there, just right up against our city in this particular grow. 900 plants, 500 pounds had already been dried, so 500 pounds and another 856 plants. So it was quite an extensive grow. We captured 9, we lost 3 that ran off into the woods that we never captured. Yeah, the black market's, it's actually doing a lot better because than it was prior to legalization, and people find that strange, but yeah, they're literally hiding in plain sight because just across the highway, not less than a half a mile away, is a quote-unquote legal marijuana grow that's going through the county, gotten their application, is growing in these greenhouses. So even the smell that was coming off the illegal grow didn't raise any kind of suspicion because you have a legal grow just down the road. And so, no, they're, they live in tents. They run really fast. But no, we could bust one a day if we had the resources. We have a list of about 40 left, and we take them off as we go. It's being responsive to our community. Our community wants us to do this, and if you're illegal, then you need to get out of my county. Unfortunately, we've legalized it by the state, but as far as the illegal grows, go do it somewhere else.
Deputy
That's
Martin,
kinda my take.
thank you, Sheriff. Deputy Martin, something else that we were promised was that a tightly controlled, legalized market for recreational marijuana would reduce marijuana use by young people and reduce the prevalence of that and other drugs in the hallways of our schools. What's your experience?
I got stats from our statistician with our sheriff's office, and just in Douglas County alone, from 2013 to 2016, we have a 149% increase. That's just the juveniles that we have caught. I'm sure it's probably twice that amount if you consider the ones that we'd never caught. The whole thing, again, I can't stress enough about educating our youth. One of the things I know the keynotes we're talking about this morning, and I spoke to you earlier about, is the social media. That's a big part of the black market as well, where they're being attacked, where kids are finding misinformation, where kids are able to access this product. And that's where my concern is, again, being an officer that works in the school, is for our youth. Where are they going with this? Where are they getting their information? The parents that are using it. One of my parents, I was dealing with an 8th grader that was trying to argue with me while I was teaching the marijuana curriculum, and he had his 6 months of smoking marijuana under his belt and knew everything. And when you're discussing it with him, and then you're talking to the counselor at the school, and you find out mom's email address is Bubbles420, you realize you're fighting a very upward battle as law enforcement and as an educator, trying to teach these kids that what's going into their brain is not what's going into an adult's brain. Adult's brain is fully developed. Your brain is not fully developed. Your cells are still developing. The doctors have hit on that repeatedly. And it's not just IQ. The big thing that creates success in this world is called emotional intelligence. Kids already lack emotional intelligence because they're talking to devices and not people.
That's true.
And now with them talking to devices and not people, we got to teach them digital citizenship, but we don't just teach them that. We got to teach them that you got to fit in, feel good, or forget your feelings. And the way you do that is you use marijuana to do that. I just had a text-a-tip from one of my students discussing the fact that the suicide rate is through our roof because of this drug. They can't cope because they can't talk to anybody in person because, again, digital citizenship, their devices. Then they can't cope because they're now putting a product that causes depression and causes anxiety, the same things that they were suffering from when they started using this. So the legislation that we're going to educate our youth, and we've never seen a dime, and I don't think our sheriff would ever want to see a dime from the tax that we supposedly make off of marijuana. We don't make anything. Law enforcement, medical care costs, and court litigation are eating up any money that we ever would make off any taxation here. It's just pathetic to watch, and it's very frustrating to watch as law enforcement.
Counselor, how's the district attorney's office handling the increase in the prevalence of these drugs in our schools and our hallways?
Obviously, we look at it two ways. I do mostly what are large-scale distribution cases, and so we understand and we want to help people that have issues with drugs, and we want to get them the help in terms of either getting off of it or specifically with juveniles as well, getting them to a point where they are able to socialize without it. So I will say we have a initiative. We're not trying to go after users. We are trying to go after the people that are providing the product to them. We want to get users and people that have issues not only with marijuana but also heroin, meth, the help to recover from that addiction. However, I get told a lot, I don't do victim cases. I completely disagree with that. You can see how not only heroin and meth, but marijuana has affected and torn apart families. And therefore, I believe the people that profit from that distribution and from that pain that affects, and I'm sure there are many people in this room that have had people in their families that have had addiction, that have suffered from it, and what that does to families throughout the state of Colorado and America. Therefore, it is my job as a prosecutor to put those people who are not only distributing it throughout the streets, but are making huge amounts of money off of this behind bars. And that is sort of how I believe that my office looks at the difference between user amounts and then obviously the large-scale distribution. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, Chief.
As the home of the largest non-collegiate school district in the state of Colorado, Cherry Creek, I'll quote our superintendent by saying the only thing that legalizing marijuana has brought to Cherry Creek School District is more marijuana. There's a huge misconception here that we were criminalizing kids at extensive rates for possession of small amounts of marijuana. It wasn't happening. We've had to find different ways to deal with it with regard to criminal charges, and we try very hard not to criminalize kids. But I have 4 SROs and a sergeant assigned to the Cherry Creek High School, and I had to build a new property room that was self-ventilated to hold and then dispose of all the marijuana that we're recovering. Now, I'm not going to say that it all came from the school, but it was a part of it. And my SROs are inundated with marijuana-related cases, with issues coming from the schools. I echo what they're saying there because we see the same exact thing. And what's challenging is we've introduced so many different variations, and the parents don't know. Parents don't know what dabbing is and what that does to a person. We didn't know what butane hash oil was and that it would blow up in a room when we legalized all this, and now we're backtracking it all. And so where the other states have the ability, and I've worked up in Wyoming on this, and they've got some incredible prevention strategies that are written, that are formative, that they're doing with their kids, and they've not legalized this already, that it's helping them. And it's able to turn the kids, which is the Cole Peace memo point number 1, prevent from minors, away from marijuana. And for me, what I've seen is they have just mastered the art. Because if I talk to 10 kids at Cherry Creek High School, all 10 of them would say this: well, everybody knows marijuana is a whole lot safer than alcohol. And the marketing of this has mastered at the child level that piece to say, this is safer than alcohol. So this is better than alcohol. And I don't think those two are synonymous, but we can't get that message out. We can't get support from parents. And across our school district, and I'm not saying, you know, Cherry Creek School District, my official answer is it's a fantastic school district, and I encourage your children to go there. But the fact is, it's big. You know, the freshman class, 1,100 kids. That's what we're dealing with, and they all feel marijuana is no big deal. That's what their parents are supporting. That's what we get, and it is a big deal.
Chief, I'd like to stick with you for this next topic. We read in publications, mainstream media publications, from the Denver Post to the New York Times to the LA Times. Dick, that's Los Angeles, not Los Animas Times. LA Times, about the tax windfall that Colorado is receiving, that local governments that have allowed recreational marijuana sales are receiving. Talk to us a little bit about your perspective on this windfall of tax dollars that the state of Colorado and the local governments are receiving from the sale of recreational marijuana and the other the costs of enforcement and other social costs with which your department is dealing.
I'll start at the state level, and I would just ask you to show me where all the money's going, and let's see what that cost and revenue is. I would say that we're not getting near enough in law enforcement or down through to the county or community level to deal with this. I'm also home to a wonderful amphitheater, Fiddler's Green. It too is a wonderful place, and I encourage you to enjoy it. But I call it the marijuana volcano, because I'm tasked with managing the 29 events we had there this summer, and
Can I get some tickets?
Yeah, put you right down front. But Greenwood Village opts out. We have no stores or dispensaries, so I get no tax revenue at all from any of this. And I don't say that because I want it. I'm just saying that there's been no compensation for the cities, 72% that opt out, we still have to endure and bear the costs of the law enforcement. I have smoking teams that I put out at concerts because my community absolutely is angry that they've lost their amphitheater and there's so much marijuana smoking. So I've created strategies, internal and external to the bowl, pardon the pun, what we called it long before, of what we're going to do to prevent the proliferation of smoking marijuana. Now, there's no secret that people have been smoking marijuana at concerts a long time. But it has grown, and now I have to bear the cost of dealing with that, and our courts bear the cost of those tickets. And as it rolls out, we're all bearing undue burdens and costs with prosecution, with storing, with farming in Pueblo.
Hiring us as off-duty.
Off-duty, correct, to do all these things. And nobody's compensating me for all the costs from Fiddler's Green for this.
Sheriff.
Well, I don't feel sorry
What
for
do you-
Chief
Sheriff, what-
Jackson. Do you know what the tax base is in Greenwood Village? I take half his budget. Can't even buy cars in Pueblo. No, there's no money. And if anybody would really do the research, here's what the research will tell you. So this whole anecdotal discussion that, oh, we just don't know because we don't know. We don't know what you don't know, right? We don't have the data. And the whole governor thing is like, oh, get the baseline data. That's valid. Here's the thing we already know. Here's the thing we knew before we legalized it. We know, and there's 30 years of research, probably 20 years of solid data that tells us what alcohol has done to our communities from a taxing perspective. So we tax alcohol till hell won't have it, right? And we tax tobacco the same way, sin taxes. Large taxable substances. And we know through research that the harm that it does to our communities, all of our communities, tobacco and alcohol, only takes care of about 8 to 15, and I'm being kind, 8 to 15% of the social harm it does. That includes everything that we've talked about here today in all the breakout sessions. So we know that so why would we think that another legalized substance that we're going to tax and get rich on would be any different? It boggles my mind that we don't look to what we already know. And we let the industry get away with the marketing strategy that they did, and here we are. So all you have to do is compare it, double it. Let's say we're going to get more taxable income for marijuana. We're going to get 16 to 30% of the social harm. We're still in a deficit, people. This is not rocket science. It's just that people don't want to know it. They don't want to face it. And so when it comes to the taxable income, my county is the highest taxed county, I think even higher than Boulder. We're about 32 to 36% on the tax. And we're giving marijuana scholarships to colleges. Cool, $250,000, isn't that cool? So,
I think they said no, Sheriff.
But we're not getting any money. There's no money going to the law enforcement. In fact, at the state level, they'll say, a lot of this discretionary funding has gone to law enforcement. Technically, yes, in the form of money to go to post to give all the law enforcement officers the basic course of Marijuana 101, which we wouldn't have needed had we not legalized it. So it's like a gerbil on a wheel, people. It's just, we're just going. We're going and going and going on the part of law enforcement until the citizens of this great state decide to go in another direction. But you really left us holding the bag.
Deputy.
I just reiterate everything you guys have said. It's ridiculous with regards to what's going on. We're not seeing anything. I don't think any of us up here want to see any of this money, to be honest, because to me it's still dirty money. It's still illegal under federal law. It's bizarre that we ever let this pass, but I think a lot of people were given false promises that never came to be. And they won't ever come to be because it's a drug, and it's a illegal drug federally because it needs to be. And it needs to go back that way. But we need people to stand up, as was mentioned earlier, stand up and make this fight. Because, again, we are fighting this upward battle, and we're going to continue to hold the bag until we can get you guys and get everybody together to make a decision to make a change back to the way it needs to be.
Counselor, do you guys have to build a safe in the basement of your building to stash all of this drug money that you're getting?
Oh, well, I was going to talk actually about, the forfeiture laws did change this year in Colorado, and one of the biggest, I know, I'm sorry.
They took the one good tool we had.
That's a topic for a different panel.
Yeah, but one of the biggest things that we can do to take down these DTOs, and what I was going to say is, we're talking to you. We are trying, and we are doing our best, and I believe I can speak for all of us in that we will continue to fight to take the product off the street in the black market. But one of the biggest tools that we have is to dismantle these drug trafficking organizations by taking their lights, taking their financials, taking the way that they make money. And so, again, I will leave that to another panel, but it's tough when you get your tools taken away from you.
Thank you. The last issue that I'm going to ask the panel to address is we've gone through all of this. We know that there's a problem. We know that the problem has increased. The only way that we really have on the law enforcement side to deal with that is to put these bad guys behind bars, and for that you need prosecutors who are willing to prosecute. Right. Sheriff, will you get us started on this? We'll run through our panel and then do some real quick closing thoughts from each of you.
Well, I get the DAs mad at me all the time, but they were not on board initially for a lot of different reasons. One, case law that was going through. I got to tell you, we are being successful now across the state for a couple of reasons. Number one, those entities and law enforcement agencies that were fighting still the black market, up in Greenwood Village and down in Pueblo, we're fighting, we're training everybody. We're training everybody that'll listen to us. How are you guys doing this? How are you guys doing this? More importantly than anything, the DAs are starting to come on board. And they're doing some incredible work across the state. And I think that is only going to grow and grow and grow. And not necessarily the big DAs like the 18th and some of the bigger ones up in Denver. They always have a great professional organization. I got to tell you, the rural communities in this state don't necessarily have those highly paid, highly professional. They do, but they just don't have the quality and the quantity that these bigger agencies have. And they're starting to get online. So one of the best things we can have are bright line rules, because cops, as he said, aren't that bright. Bright line rules. Look, if you have a BHO in your place, it's all illegal. So that makes it easy for us, right? Easy's good. I think we need to really push the scientific piece. We need a roadside sobriety test. We got to have it. And it would seem like to me, with all this money and all this research that they're doing, why is that not a priority? How many people do we have to kill on the highways until that becomes a priority? So I say we take some of the money that is available out there and get it to the places that are going to help us with the tools that we need to combat it. Well, that's my
Go ahead, Chief.
I'm going to tell you that we're fighting amongst ourselves. Last week, I finally wrestled a few devices we've been testing at the state level away, and we've been able to test them. We're going to put together a protocol that we've been held off for basically for years on this field impairment because of all the questions and why it won't work or why it'll create bad case law. I will tell you this. The three of us work for what I will call a fantastic partner in George Brockler. And he is pro-public safety. He is absolutely on the mark with this, and he has helped us move it forward. But he has said, go get it and try and make it work, and let's figure this out. And that's what we in law enforcement need. I'm going to click it back one layer, though, and say that this is not about, in my opinion, putting people in bars or taking bad people off the street. I think we're missing the mark by not spending more time on prevention and in our families and in working with the ability to reverse the belief that marijuana is so much safer than alcohol. We have to turn people away from it because you cannot arrest your way out of this problem or issue, and it's a societal thing that will continue to plague to drag us down until we can get our hands around the field manifestations of these things are better field impairment testing. That'd be great, but that's a tool. What we need is people not to be smoking marijuana, being impaired, and then getting behind the wheel. And that's where the school officers and all of the officers out in the field are working so hard and are going to benefit us more there than putting people in jail.
30-second close. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
go ahead,
no,
Darcy.
go ahead.
No, please. I was going to let you off the hook on the prosecution one, but go ahead.
Oh, no, I echo what you said about my boss. I appreciate what he has let me do, but I'm only one prosecutor who does these narcotics cases by myself. So the more resources and help that the DA's offices can get, I welcome that, because I'd love to have some fellow DAs who are as passionate about drug crime as I am.
And myself, again, being in the educational field with juveniles, I'm very much along what the chief said, is being very proactive, getting the message out, not just to kids. We have parent academies. That's, again, one of our lessons. I actually just had George Brockler out at our parent academy that we had at the Charles Schwab building at Lone Tree. He came out and spoke, and we, again, discussed specifically that we need to get out there and get the message to grandparents, parents, the adults, the real facts that are out there in regards to marijuana, to the emotional intelligence, to dealing with kids, and being that nosy parent, being that nosy person in your child's life. It's not about giving every kid a trophy, okay? We got to get away from that. We got to let kids fail, but when they do fail, I think the DA has been doing a great job with our juveniles, getting them in juvenile diversion. Juvenile diversion, they don't just get a slap on the wrist or get that charge and then they're done. They get the charge, but then they go through juvenile diversion and they have to go through a process where they actually get educated on what it really is that they're dealing with, what they're putting in their bodies. And we actually see a lot better success rate by putting them in juvenile diversion, because they've had to go through the counseling sessions weekly, bi-weekly, or however it's set up for them on the case-by-case basis. But that's, again, I really believe in the proactive piece. That's the only way we're going to get ahead of this. We got to be proactive as adults and get the truth out there. Stop letting the marijuana companies put out all these fallacies to the community, because that's really what it is. The student that was up here earlier talking about the vape pens are all over the place in our schools. And we got to put a stop to this. You got to know what they look like. The jewel pen looks just like a USB port. They put it in there, the kids pull up their shirt, they blow the vape pen right into their shirt. So again, it's about getting ahead of this ball game, being proactive.
Thank you. 30-second closing thought. Notice that is not plural, gentleman and lady. Sheriff.
I'll pass.
I will not.
You are elected.
I will not. I am a firm believer in the power of people.
I give my time to John.
Look at the numbers in this room. I am the equivalent, and we're working hard, but I'm white noise. We talk, and they see me as a diversion more than anything. And it's a tired voice that they've heard. So if you get anything out of this, you have to understand the multiplication factoring of what you all do with your own networks. Leave here today and go find the facts. Leave here today and go talk to somebody. Influence what you can in your own sphere of influence to make a change. Because this cannot come, and law enforcement cannot drive the societal community change that needs to happen with this. It is far too far down the road. One of the biggest misses that I regret as the chief's representative when this was legalized is we didn't engage enough before. And now we're fighting a battle uphill, upstream. And I can't do it. He can't do it. None of us can. But collectively together, you guys can make a lot of noise. You guys have circles of influence that are much broader and different than ours. And until you guys decide enough is enough, they will continue to chip away. There's 40 bills every year in the legislature to ease this, to make it easier, to make it better, and it's all a bunch of crap. Make it stop. And it comes from you, not us.
Darcy, you want to try and top that?
Oh, gosh. I would just say, as a prosecutor, the best part of my job is getting to work with the narcotics units of these counties and with DEA. I really can't tell you how hard they work, and I appreciate so much the time that they spend on these cases with me. I couldn't do my job without them, so I think we should give them a round of applause.
Guys, if you want them to make a change, put your finger up in the air right now if you want to make a change. If you want people to have a better sense about themselves, put your finger right here on your nose. If you want people to stand proud, put your finger right here on your chin. No, on your chin. On your chin. What I'm getting at, guys, it's not what we say, it's what we do. That's what it comes down to.
Folks, let's give a round of applause. These panelists took their time. They're on the front lines. Thank you all for joining us here today. Jeff has a real quick announcement before we go ahead and break. Thank you.
I do want to point out and highlight this teacher over here in the corner who brought her students. Miss Allie, can you stand up real quick? Brought her students from school today to help be a part of that. That's where we start, right there with the education. Okay, we're going to have one more breakout session, then back here promptly at 3 o'clock for the debate. Thanks.